In this video, I'm going to do an unboxing of a used Japanese Sega Saturn. This is part of my Sega Saturn 20 Years Later series of videos. So let's get to it. Now, just a quick story behind this Sega Saturn here. I was looking for Sega Saturn consoles on eBay, and quite a few times I was outbid on the consoles that I was looking to purchase. Being that I'm stepping back in time trying out these consoles, I wanted to try and get a cross-section of what was available for the system. And one of the things that was different were there were several different controllers that came out for the system. There was a Japanese controller, and then there was the North American controller, and then when they realized that the North American controller wasn't as good as the Japanese controller, they introduced the Japanese controller in North America, and then they came out with that 3D analog stick controller that I was talking about earlier. So I wanted to get a system that had the North American controller and the Japanese controller. So I came upon this system here, which is a Japanese Sega Saturn. And it was listed on eBay for $5, I think was the bidding, up until the day that the auction ended. And I thought, well, I'd like to get this system. It was actually listed as not working. Now, the person who listed it had 3 demo discs that come with this. They're inside here. And they said that none of the demo discs worked on the system. Well, just by the colors of this system, I knew that it was a Japanese imported Sega Saturn. It was not the North American version. But all 3 discs, the demo discs that come in here, are all North American discs, so I know they wouldn't play on there anyway. So I thought, well, that system probably works, and I'll take the chance on buying it because I'm betting that it's going to work. So I still don't know if it's going to work, but I think it's going to work. It's just, again, the region encoding why they couldn't get it to work. If I can't get it to work, then I'm going to use the shell for something interesting in the future. But again, I'm hoping that it's going to work. So the bidding started at $5, and within the last 10 minutes of the auction, it went all the way up to $31. So with shipping, I got this for $46. Now it comes with 3 demo discs and I think 2 or 3 controllers. I'm not sure. But we'll find out when we open it up. So without any further ado, let's get this thing opened up. Now, if this doesn't work, not a big deal, because I actually have a North American Sega Saturn on the way. It's being shipped to me as I speak. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that the tech that I buy generally sticks with me for maybe up to a year, and then I sell it. I don't know if that's going to be the case with the Sega Saturn. It might be nice to hold on to, but again, it's kind of against my nature. I'm not a collector. But we'll see. So having 2 systems, not a big deal. I could always sell one or both of them when I decide to get rid of them. So let's open this thing up. And here are the demo discs we have. And they're kind of scuffed up, but they are just demo discs. This is that Nights into Dreams game that I talked about. And in a future video, I'll show you the controller that came out for this. This is made by the team that made Sonic the Hedgehog, so it's considered one of the better games on the system. But this is only a sampler, so, and it does look a little bit, I don't want to say worse for wear because I've seen a lot worse, but there are some scuffs on it. This one, bootleg sampler. This is, I think, what was put out by Sega. It says not for resale, video game sampler. It might have come with a system, and this one is actually pretty scratched up. Not too bad, it probably still play, but yeah. The last one is Virtua Fighter 2, not for resale. So this is actually not even a demo disc, this is actually the game, Virtua Fighter 2. And that one is kind of scratched up. But again, should work no problem. I've seen much worse, and I actually have a disc resurfacer, if worse comes to worse. So let's get in here and take a look. Alright, a little bit of a discoloration on this, but this is the controller that came out in Japan. Of course, this is a Japanese system. So they only had 2 controllers that came out. Different colors, but 2 different variations, 2 different designs. And this is the first design. And this system is, well, I'll get into that when I actually show you the system, but Sega, when they came out with the Genesis, was the first video game company that actually had fairly ergonomic controllers. And this was the system that came after the Genesis. And these seem pretty, I've never held one before, but I've heard a lot of good things about these controllers. And basically you have your D-pad over here, you have your start button here, you have A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and then your two shoulder buttons up here. A little bit of discoloration there. I don't know if it's a smoking issue or if it's just an age issue, but generally I clean these things up when I buy things used like this. I clean them up with rubbing alcohol. So, what do we have next? Alright, now, let me just show you here. Japanese Sega Saturn, you have the Sega logo there, just straight Sega. This is a North American second model controller, which is identical to the Japanese version except of the color and also the logo. This is the logo of a North American Sega Saturn, which is, in my opinion, I like the Saturn itself, but the font on the Sega, it leaves a little bit to be desired. As you can see, there's some scuffs on this controller. Not really too concerned with that. Again, I'm not a collector. I'm just more concerned with, is it going to work? And again, the same layout. It's just, this is black, has a different logo here, and the triggers are gray instead of blue on the Japanese version, but otherwise identical mold. Now this is again the second model of the controller in North America. First model in Japan. And when I show you my other Saturn, which is not going to be in this video, but I will show you the first version North American controller and the one with the analog stick. So let's see. And I think this is, okay, this I think is a third-party controller, yes. This is a generic third-party controller here. SuperPad 8 for Sega Saturn. The shoulder buttons actually have more of a click to them. Interesting. A little bit different shape. D-pad here. This is actually a decent third-party controller. Again, ABC, XYZ, and then you have what appears to be a turbo here. You can just turn it on and off. Shoulder buttons are blue, and on the back you have a switch. Interesting. I don't know. It has a little guy there, and then doesn't have anything on the other side, so I don't know if that has to do with turbo too, or I don't know. We'll figure it out. But it's the Performance SuperPad 8 for Sega Saturn. Let's get to the main event here. Actually, let's just get to the cords here really quickly first. Now, when you buy a retro system, you want to make sure that, again, you want to make sure you have as many pack-ins as possible for the price that you want to pay for it. And you always want to make sure that you have this mostly, because this is mostly typically this cord, the composite cord, is typically the one that's most proprietary. Not so much the composite end, but this end here that plugs into the system itself. So you want to make sure that your retro system has this cord, because you can buy it secondhand or you can buy it separately, but you're going to be paying a lot more for it because just by virtue of the fact that you have to pay shipping on it, whereas it's all packed into one thing here, there's a savings involved when it's packed in. So if anything, always make sure that your retro system has this composite cord. Now this, not so much, because this is a more generic power cord. Now depending on the system that you choose, you also want to make sure that the power cord is with it. If you have an N64, for instance, that had a power supply that plugged right into the back of the system, and you want to make sure that that's packed in there. But a system like this, power cord, not so important, because this is a generic power cord that was included with the Sega Dreamcast. I believe you could use the same with the original Xbox and the original PlayStation. Now this is actually a thin cord. It's thinner than I'm used to for these kind of devices here. But being that this is a Japanese version and I'm in North America here, I can just plug this into the wall and there's not going to be a problem. But if you live in different territories, you might be dealing with different electrical requirements for your system. So you have to make sure you get a step-down converter or something like that. But for my needs, everything is going to work. I'm going to be able to plug this into my wall and plug it into my television set, no problem. So now let's get to the main event here, the Sega Saturn itself. Now, it's actually a lot lighter than I thought it was going to be, and a little bit more dirty than I thought it was going to be. Now, the Sega Saturn had two models. One was this model. This was the first version, and the way you can tell the first version from the second version is the layout here on the front, and there's some design differences on the side. I'll show you side-by-side version 1 or Model 1 versus Model 2 when I get my North American version, because the North American version is a Model 2 system. But generally, right out of the gate, you can tell when you have a Model 1 system or a Model 2 system just by the buttons here. These are oval buttons. On the version 2, you have circular buttons, and on this version 1, you have a glossy front plate here. And also on the version 2, it says Sega here, where it says it up here on the version 1. Now, the system also will come in different colors, but that doesn't have any bearing on the actual design of the system. There were only two designs of the system. Now, in Japan, there were some clear systems. In Japan, they actually let some other companies make the Saturn, or at least brand the Saturn. There was a Hitachi version, so it was called Hi Saturn, and then there was a JVC version, which was, I believe, called a Victor Saturn. And then in Korea, the Sega Saturn was sold under the Samsung brand, believe it or not. So it was called the Samsung Saturn. And the Samsung Saturn looked most like the North American version because it was all black. But in Japan, this was the first version that came out, the gray with the black and blue. And then the second version was a white version, which is actually probably one of the best looking Saturns that was available, even better than the North American versions in my opinion. And that's a system I don't have and probably will not buy because it's not that important to me, but it is a nice looking device. In North America, the two versions only came in black. Now this is the Japanese Sega Saturn logo here, or font that they use, and I actually prefer it to the North American font. Again, not a fan. Almost looks like a Comic Sans here. Not a fan of the North American version. Or even, I think it was the PAL territories as well had this font going. But I much prefer this logo here for the Japanese version. Now obviously your games, you hit the eject button, the games go in there, and it's a CD system again. Top loading system, you have a little transparent area here, a little window here. It's darker. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see any discs on this system, but I know you can on the North American versions. Now an interesting thing about this console is that you actually have a cartridge slot in the back, and that's not to play games with, that's to increase the RAM on the device here. You can actually up it by, I believe, 4 megabytes of RAM. And they're fairly big cartridges. I actually have one on order that's going to allow me to play import games on my Sega Saturn. Now, I know it's going to work with my North American version. I don't know if it's going to work with this. It's an action replay card, and again, I will do a future video on it. So click on the link at the end of this video if you want to see any of the other Saturn-related videos that I'm going to be doing. But generally, you would put the RAM cartridge in here, and that would increase the RAM that you have available on the system, and you'd be able to play. Certain games required it. I believe there was a fighting game, a Japanese fighting game that required it. But the slot back here was not only for RAM, you could also get a memory cartridge, so you could store your saves directly on that cartridge. Again, like I said, I'm going to get the Action Replay card, and that card is actually the most versatile because you can play import games with it, you can use it as a RAM cartridge, and you can do saves on it. You can put your game saves on it. But you don't need a cartridge to save games on the system. There's actually an internal memory on here, and it's actually powered on the back here. There's a little door back here, and it's actually powered by a battery that is not in here. So I'm going to have to get a battery to put in here, but it's right, it goes right in there, and that's going to allow you to save your games and whatnot. Now in this slot you could get an expansion card which would allow you to play VCDs. The card does not exist in here, and I believe it was only released in Japan. I could be wrong about that, but it's not necessary unless you want to play VCDs on this thing, and I don't even own a VCD, so it's not a big deal for me. If you're not familiar with a VCD, it's a video CD, and the quality is probably on par with laser discs. It's not quite the quality of DVD, but supposedly it's a little bit better than VHS. So let's take a tour around this device here. We have a matte gray plastic. You have a little bit of a couple of ridges here, and that's so you can kind of grip this when you close it. Again, you have your little window here, you have your Sega Saturn branding here, you have your Sega branding here, you have your black cartridge door. You have a couple of lines here, and the reason I'm just pointing these lines out is because they change on the Model 2 a little bit. And you actually have little holes, or little, as you can see, there are little accents there that don't appear on the second version, but they're on the sides of this one here. Again, you have all your buttons up front here, your power button, your eject button, and your access button, which is actually a reset button, I believe. There's an access light in here somewhere when you know that it's reading from the disk. Up front here you have two controller ports, controller port 1 and controller port 2. On the second version, again the Model 2, you have Sega branding there, which you do not have here. You have this sort of winged look on the front there. On the right hand side you have some venting up there, and then you just have some ridges on the side here. On the back you have, again, that access door. I keep ejecting the top loader. You have that access door here. I'm going to have to replace the battery on that. You have your label back here, and I don't think we have a date on there. It would be nice to know when this was made, but this is again a Model 1, so this was probably made close to 20 years ago. If not 20, then maybe 19 years ago. So it's an older system. You have your power port here, you have your communication connector here, and then you have your AV out here. On the left-hand side of the device, you have sort of a circular vent here, and then you have some venting here, and then you have some ridges here. On the bottom of the device, you have 4 rubberized feet, you have venting, and then you have your Japanese label there, which if I could read it would probably tell me the date that it was made. So that is the Sega Saturn Japanese model, Model 1. This came out just prior to the PlayStation 1 launch, and Sega was a solid number 2 in Japan behind the PlayStation, even though the Saturn launched before the PlayStation did, the original PlayStation. And one thing that I have to mention is the marketing campaign that they used in Japan for the Sega Saturn. I'm going to put a link in the description down below so you can see the commercials, the actual commercials that they used to promote the Sega Saturn. And at the time that they came up with this character, they had already moved on to the Model 2 of the Saturn, so you'll see the white version of the Sega Saturn in those videos. But the mascot was a human, was a guy named Segata Sanshiro. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But he was basically a karate master of some sort that beat people up and made them play the Sega Saturn. And he actually, in his last commercial appearance, he actually saved Sega headquarters from a missile strike and died in the process. So It's actually pretty funny. Check out the link in the description down below, and you can see, I think it's 8 minutes worth of the Segata Sanshiro Sega Saturn commercials. So definitely check that out. And that's going to do it for this video. So if you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. If you like what you see, please subscribe. And if you want to help out my channel, give me a thumbs up, favorite this video, or share this video. And I'll let you know if this actually works or not when I do my unboxing of the North American Sega Saturn. So that's it for now. I'll see you guys next time.